And we are now live. This is so exciting. I see folks joining. This is going to be great. As you join, please do make sure to introduce yourself in the chat. One thing we'll ask you to do is to change your chat settings to all panelists and attendees. You'll see that on the bottom, just at the top of where you can type your message in. If you are running for office or you're working on a campaign, tell us who you are, where you're running, what you're running for. We really want to know who's on the call tonight. We're going to give folks another minute and a half to jump on while the Facebook live stream gets set up. But please do introduce yourself in the chat. I know I see a couple names that I know, many that I don't, which is great. Amazing. Michelle, who's a Dem candidate for state rep in Illinois. Other folks, introduce yourself if you're here on the phone tonight. You might hear some dog toys behind me. You might hear some thunder. You know, whatever it takes. We got Tom as a candidate for Covington Board of Education in Kentucky. Carissa, candidate for Iowa House District 63. It's fantastic. Again, Sydney Hollingsworth, hello from Texas. She's working on Julie Oliver for Congress, Texas 25. As you introduce yourself, make sure to change your settings to all panelists and attendees so everybody can see. We've got Andrew from working in DC, but from Georgia, where they hope to return. Corbin Mills, who's an organizing fellow for Alex Morse for Congress. Awesome. Carrie Bloom, Democratic endorsed candidate for juvenile court judge. That's incredible. Susan, working on a Massachusetts state house race. Laura DeVow, who's a grassroots digital organizer for Ed Markey. I'm just going to keep breathing out.
Go Ed Markey.
Jarrett Shoemaker is running for town council in Montvale, New Jersey. Chandra Bishop, a Run for Something candidate running for Champaign County Coroner. Lily, who's an intern for a Dem House candidate in Tennessee House District 63. Andrew Boynton, a digital strategist for MJ Hagar. This is amazing. We're going to get started. I know more folks will continue jumping on because we had a whole bunch of people RSVP for tonight. And we are now live on Facebook, which is so exciting. For those who are new to this, my name is Amanda Littman. I'm one of the co-founders and the executive director of Run for Something. We're so excited for this to be our 4th edition of our summer-long series, Armchair Chats. The goal of this is to give you and people like you who are running for office or working on campaigns or thinking about running for office or thinking about running for office, the information you need to run a good campaign. If you missed the first 3 weeks, all 3 are on our Facebook page. Just go to Run for Something on Facebook. You will see all of the past videos. Tonight, we're going to be talking about digital campaigns. Before we get started, I want to say thank you to our sponsors. That includes Act Blue, Ask Me, Authentic Campaigns, Fireside, Claire and Stephen Crouppen, Onward Together, Yelp, Precision Strategies, and Planned Parenthood. This series is free for every single person tonight because of our sponsors, which includes Teddy's incredible firm. So we're really grateful to you and to everyone else who contributed to make it possible. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say, if you want to contribute to help make more of these possible, we welcome it. Tonight, we're going to talk about digital campaigns and specifically digital communication. You know, later this summer, we're doing specific sessions on things like paid advertising, on email fundraising, on video. That doesn't mean that you can't ask questions about those things tonight. Just know that we're going to get even into more detail later this summer. That being said, I am so excited to have Teddy Goff here with us this evening. Teddy was my first boss. Teddy is a longtime campaign expert. I believe you got your start working in the 2008 Obama campaign, doing digital there. For a brief period, was at a consulting firm, then came back and was the digital director for Obama for America 2012, and then went on to found an incredible communications and consulting firm called Precision Strategies, where he's worked with a range of clients, including folks like March for Our Lives, various foundations, and then came with us in 2016 and was the senior advisor for digital and technology for Hillary for America. He is one of the leading experts on digital campaigns, and there's no one better to ask your questions to. Teddy's going to kick us off with a couple minutes to really get a little intro level setting on what digital communications and digital campaigning is all about. Then we will open it up for questions. If you have any questions at all while Teddy is speaking, just drop them into the Q&A function down below. We'll pull from there in a little bit. With that, Teddy, take it away.
Thanks, Amanda. And thanks everybody for joining. Really happy to be here. I love Run for Something, and I am so delighted to be able to speak for people who are running for something or helping other people run for something. So I hope you all have questions, comments. I'm happy to talk to people after this also. I'll give them my email address, and I'm pretty easy to reach anyway. I'm really happy to be here. So I guess, Amanda, you mentioned that my first job was on Obama 08, and I guess for me it's often helpful to kind of like organize my thoughts on digital into the presidential cycles. And so I started on the first Obama campaign on June 4th, I want to say 2007. We weren't even using the word digital back then. The department that I joined was called New Media. And people remember the Obama 08 campaign, rightly so in my opinion, as a real leap forward for digital media or new media. But I always think it's helpful to remind people just how new it really was, and just how different it was then than what we know now. So for instance, President Obama, as well as then future Secretary Clinton, started running for president in February of 2007. The first iPhone came out in May of 2007. So, the closest thing we had to a smartphone for the first, the campaign was up and running. For the first 3 months of the campaign was a BlackBerry. Some of you who are on the younger side may not even remember that Facebook started out as a tool for college students only, and then after a while it expanded out to being available to high school students. It didn't open itself up to being available to people without a .edu email address until November of 06. And again, the campaigns got started in February of 07. So, when the 08 cycle gets going, we're like 4 months into Facebook even being available to, moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas, which is obviously, 12 years later, the reason why all the college students have left Facebook. So it's just a very, very different internet. Instagram, I think, had not even been created. Twitter had been created, but was not the kind of ubiquitous utility for journalism and politics that it is today. So, things were different. And as Amanda also mentioned, so then, I wind up going back to work on the re-election in 2012. And by then, I think, obviously the internet has changed dramatically and in really important ways since then. But I think you have an internet that much more closely resembles the one we have today. Mobile smartphone penetration is at like 90% of the population. I think, if I remember correctly, that by 2000, I don't remember if it was 11 or 12, but by some point in that campaign, it was estimated that 2/3 of Americans used Facebook on a weekly basis. Twitter was certainly, this kind of daily obsession for people who care about politics and news. Instagram was around and not quite as ubiquitous as it is today, but, a big deal. So, the internet kind of more closely resembles what we have now. And, by election day 2012, I used to know these numbers like the back of my hand. I might get them, they might be a bit off by now, but by election day 2012, I think President Obama had 45 million Facebook fans and 34 million Twitter followers or something like that. So a huge, huge, huge step forward from a time when, Twitter was kind of in an early adopter phase, being used by, primarily by kind of tech folks, and Facebook was still overwhelmingly the, sort of province of college students and some high school students. And so, I always used to say, that number 45 million Facebook fans is a really big one. But the one that we cared about even more on that campaign was that those people were friends with 99% of the US-based Facebook user base population. And Facebook was so ubiquitous then and now that 99% of Facebook users in the US is more than the number of people who vote. And so, we went through that campaign, I think, sort of realizing, and at a certain point having realized that, if we provided an experience to those 45 million people, and same for the 34 million on Twitter, and same for the however many million people it was on email and all the other ways we had to talk to them, if we gave them a reason to stick with us, if we gave them a reason to hit the like button, hit the retweet button, hit the share button, not hit the unsubscribe button, not hit the unfollow button, then they could be a tool through which we reach, that's a really big number, but they could be a tool through which we reach the even bigger number. We can reach the 99% of the country through the much smaller number that actually follows us. And we can do it with added credibility because people don't always trust political ads. They don't trust political candidates, but they're much more inclined to trust what they hear from their friends. So if we provide a experience that that our direct followers were going to like. And there is a thunderstorm. Wow. Through them we could reach kind of everybody. And that's a big change, I think, to how you feel about politics. I didn't work on campaigns 20 years earlier or 50 years earlier, but I think it would be fair to say that there was a time when campaigns cared about the undecided voter, the 5 or 10% of people who they thought could be swung, and then to some degree, obviously, the press, and to some degree, donors. But if you were just a fan of your candidate who wasn't in position to write a huge check, didn't have a huge media platform, there wasn't a whole lot you could do. Maybe you live in a swing state and can go volunteer. You might not even do that. And all of a sudden, that person is at the absolute center of the campaign, and actually at the center of our politics, because that person, whether they have 100 Facebook fans or, happen to have 10,000 Twitter followers for some reason, that person is the most powerful marketing tool we've got, if and only if we engage with them and give them an experience that is that is sufficient so that they, sort of want to do what we ask. And the flip side of that is obviously, they can, not just sort of tune out or change the channel to one of our ads if they're not happy with us, but they can actually tell all those same people why they're not happy with us. And so the sort of the ordinary person, the supporter, sort of was the, the center of our campaign. And Amanda, maybe you even remember this. We used to give out a little, like a palm card to people who had started on their first day on our team, a picture of Barack Obama, looking inspiring as always, and with like a little thought bubble coming out, or a quote bubble coming out saying, how are you going to give our people the best experience you can possibly give them today? And tons of people, tack that up to their cubicle wall or whatever. And the question for everybody every single day became, how are we going to give our people the best experience we can? And campaigns, especially at the presidential level, obviously it's a bit different if you're running for a state house or local office. The presidential campaign can be all consuming. There's a lot of people who have a lot of things to say and a lot of different kind of inroads that you can have to a presidential campaign. So we had to constantly figure out, it doesn't just go without saying that someone's going to watch our video rather than, ABC News's video. In fact, they could watch neither of our videos and go watch sports or go watch a movie. So, we had to figure out what is the thing that we can provide every day with every post, with every tweet that is, that is the best experience that someone's going to have in this election, today. So that was 2012. I think it's obviously worth mentioning that, the internet is a trickier place with more pitfalls. Than maybe you could say than we knew, but I actually think then there were probably a little bit of both, in 2012. And so now you not only have to think about how to rally your people and then, how to reach undecided folks to the best of your ability, but also how to kind of play defense against misinformation and toxicity and all the other things that that happen on the internet. But maybe I'll pause there and I can address that or the earlier stuff or whatever is on the mind of all the folks who are kind enough to join.
I think one question we've gotten quite a bit over the last couple of weeks, and I know folks, if you have more questions, please drop them into the Q&A on really anything Teddy has covered so far or anything else on your mind, is how do you think about campaigning right now when digital is all we have and when you can't be going door to door, you can't necessarily be like at the in-person events you're used to? How do you think about the different tools we have online to really recreate those relationships with voters?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I'd love to like hear from folks who are actually doing this, especially at a local level. And I'm sure you have more sophisticated thoughts than I do. It seems to me that, the kinds of things like I think some of the like the tactical answers and the technical answers are not that difficult to get to, in my opinion. Like most campaigns all campaigns essentially have already been doing email, have already been doing social media, have already been doing texting, maybe not all, but most, when it comes to texting. And, those are the things that become the, the kind of main or only communications channels in the current environment. The difference obviously is that they didn't used to be the only ones, and probably didn't used to be the main ones. You know, even from when it comes to organizing, you know, I think many campaigns, I mean, this I think probably varies a little more than like social, which I think pretty much everyone does. But, you know, many campaigns we're doing things with Zoom, or we're doing things with, you know, if not Zoom, then, you know, then Facebook groups or WhatsApp groups, or, you know, trying to find ways to kind of organize people online. But again, the point was sort of to try to, you know, in many cases was to sort of try to get people offline. And so I guess to me, you know, the bigger question is like, okay, so we know we're going to use email, we know we're going to use social, we know we're going to use texting, we're probably going to use Facebook groups or WhatsApp groups or Instagram DM threads, maybe Zoom, whatever. You know, there aren't like that many kind of like magical unicorn unheard of technologies other than those. I mean, there's more proprietary kind of organizing tools for making phone calls and things like that. But the places where people are and where you can kind of aggregate people are the ones that we all know. So to me, the question is like, how do you actually like do that well, you know? And, you know, I think, you know, there's a reason people like to get together in real life, you know, and I think there's one of the reasons why I think COVID has been like difficult just for human beings, apart from a campaign context, is a FaceTime with a friend or a Zoom with a friend is like not the same as dinner with friends. And, you know, people like to sort of see each other and give each other a hug and be around each other. And it's not quite as sustaining to do that over FaceTime or whatever. And I think by that same token, you know, I'm guessing many of you, most of you, maybe all of you have been to field offices, have knocked on doors. It's fun. People do it because it's fun, and they stop doing it when it's not fun in most cases. You know, I've always believed that, you know, people volunteer for a campaign because they want the campaign to win, obviously, but that's like a necessary but not sufficient condition. It also needs to be fun. You need to see that there's people like you who are doing it and that you like them. And, you know, it's like nice to see them every Saturday at the office. And so to me, the question is like, how can you, you know, maybe replicate, but maybe even replicate is like the wrong frame of mind. How can you create a new and equally satisfying experience to that? Because again, we know that we can text people, we know that we can call people. We could have done that before COVID. We can still do it. We might, that's now our only option in a way it wasn't before, but we could have done it before and we're still doing it. But the question I think is, you know, how do you create a sense of community, and how do you create a sense of sort of loyalty and connectivity to people who maybe have never met, or at best have like most recently seen each other 5 months ago? Because I think that's, in terms of kind of getting people to volunteer the second time, that's the key. You know, I think people may volunteer a first time because they want the candidate to win, because they, you know, want some experience, whatever it may be, but they're not going to come back if they don't feel a kind of human stickiness and an accountability and a connection to each other. And I don't think there's a off-the-shelf answer to that question. You know, I think it has to do with how the candidate speaks. I think it has to do with how the campaign employees speak, if you know, how the organizers speak. I think it has to do with how people are trained. I think it's obviously a technology question too. Are you setting up spaces where people can kind of get to know each other in a frictionless way that is not a, you know, a difficult or a you know, encumbering thing in their lives? You know, so it's both. But I guess, you know, to me, if I were running a campaign this cycle, whether it's for city council or for president, I'd be thinking not just like, okay, we need to take all of our door knocks and make them phone calls, like duh, but thinking, you know, really deeply about like, how do human beings connect to each other, and how can I take people who've never met, or at best have met and not seen each other in a while, and make them feel accountable to each other and connected to each other, you know, via platforms that aren't the best at that.
Yeah, Ross, you know, my co-founders talked a lot about this with candidates and with our team of, it's not about recreating the offline experience, it's about recreating the offline emotions in a way that is native to the platform online. And I think
that's great, yeah.
You get at this really intentionally of like, what is native to the candidate, what is native to their organizers, where is it most comfortable, and where is it most authentic? Andrew Eisenhower has a really interesting question about, if the candidate themselves is not comfortable on social, what would you suggest? And a second part of this is, how do you think about staffing, or how would you prioritize your time? Let's say you can only hire one person to do digital. What would you say they should be doing?
Okay, so on the first one, you know, I think there's a million different ways to be good at social, and by the way, there's a million different ways to be bad at social. You know, I think, you know, I think people look at AOC as the most obvious example and think she's so good at this because she's young and probably grew up with this stuff, and I assume she writes her own stuff at least most of the time, and probably is the only person with the password to her accounts, and she does it all, and that's great. Not everyone's like that. Not everyone should try to be like that. There are candidates who should not have the password to their own Twitter accounts, and who shouldn't even try to, even like, if you think about, it was more famous, I think, during the campaign than now, but think about how AOC used to like make Easy Mac while taking questions on Instagram Live. A lot of candidates like shouldn't do that. And they may be fantastic legislators or fantastic executives. That doesn't mean that we want to see them making Easy Mac or talk to them while they're making Easy Mac. So, I just think there's a lot of different models here. I always think it's, when I have taken questions kind of along those lines, I think it's worth talking about Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, I don't know how old he is. He's 77 or something like that. So he was probably 74 in 2016 when he became this social media phenomenon. It's worth noting that his team had been investing in a social media presence for a long time before that. I've never met Bernie Sanders. Maybe I have the wrong impression here, but my impression is he probably doesn't write most of his stuff. I don't think he's a person who's like following updates on, features from Twitter or Facebook, or deeply studying, how the algorithms work. For that matter, neither was Barack Obama. They both, though, stood for things that were, that we could understand what they were, and spoke about those things in a compelling way. And in their cases, a slightly different way or very different way of doing it than AOC, hired people who, I think, sort of got them and got what the message was, and tried to be good writers and make good videos, and the results were different, but the outcome or the sense that social media was helping them more than it was hurting them was the same. So, to me, I think the message is not like live stream everything. It's definitely not all tweets must be written by the candidate, and it's bullshit if they're not. It's like, what is inspiring about this person? What does this person stand for? What's good about this person? And how can we show that to people, to the best of our ability? And what's a process, whether it involves a candidate or is all staff, to kind of, get at that. One more example, and then I'll get to the second part of the question. People may remember that Congressman Dingell used to have an absolutely hysterical Twitter account. The truth of it was, I don't think I'm spilling a big secret here, that was written by a staffer. That staffer, I never met Congressman Dingell either. I don't even really know if he was like that. I hope he was like that, but frankly, it's not even important to me whether he was like that. It was a convincing persona created by a staffer. So, I think that we sort of misunderstand what authenticity means. I think we overemphasize this word authenticity, which can mean any number of things to different people. The question is, how are you conveying to people what you stand for, and doing it in a way that they're gonna, like and feel some sense of inspiration from, and that doesn't have to mean, the candidate runs their own Twitter account. In terms of, by the way, Amanda, you should like jump in here at any point if you want, because you're something of an expert on this stuff too. And then we can get to the second part of the question.
This thunderstorm is insane. The only thing I would add here, and I actually think this is really important for people as you think about who you are online, is that especially for candidates who are running their own social, you should aim to be yourself. That doesn't necessarily mean your full self. And this is a distinct that I notice, we do social media scrubs of every candidate or reviews of every candidate we endorse. That shit is public, my friends. It is not your group chat. It is not your, just your friends. Like, that being said, you can be your authentic self without showing every part of your personality. And that's something I would caution candidates about as you're thinking about, like, what non-political topics do I talk about on Twitter or on Instagram? Doesn't need to be everything.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, and this is like a bit of heresy, and then Mr. Eisenhower, I promise we will in fact get to the second part of your question, as well as maybe even some other questions before we talk about this one for a full hour. But I don't even really, personally, I don't even buy the word authenticity. I think it's often weaponized to suit the purposes of whoever is using it. Like, here's the thing I've said very often, maybe not always to 75 people or however many are watching this with a live stream to boot, but anyway, I'm just going to go for it. I think many people feel that Barack Obama was someone who is an authentic personality, an authentic politician. And obviously, as we all know very painfully, many people think that Hillary Clinton is someone who is not authentic. And the truth of the matter is, I guess it's frankly from having gotten to know both of them a little bit, that I developed this belief that authenticity is a made up word that, you know, people use to suit their own purposes. The truth of the matter is that, you know, Hillary Clinton, the person who you see on TV who may sometimes strike you as carefully choosing her words and, you know, maybe carefully sort of positioning herself within a conversation, as well as, by the way, a charmer and someone who is, you know, one of the most effective, you know, politicians in the Democratic Party. The person you see on TV is the real person. And Barack Obama, you know, who I obviously adore, and I'm sure we all on this call adore and respect, you know, is someone who's, you know, frankly great at looking you in the eye and making you feel like you're the most important person in the world, whether that's true or not. And that's why so many people, you know, so many people adored him. So, you know, which of those is more authentic than the other? And I don't mean that as a criticism of either. I just mean, you know, to me, authenticity is not the goal. You know, conveying what you stand for and doing it in a way that serves your political purposes, you know, building support, getting you elected, that's the goal. You obviously, ideally shouldn't be full of shit, but, you know, I don't see authenticity as a real concept with real meaning. And I certainly don't construe it to mean tell everybody everything about yourself and broadcast every last, you know, feeling that you've got. Okay, the second part of that question was, where should you focus? You know, that's hard to do, and every campaign's different. You know, I think most people in this line of work would tell you that email is, you know, it's not the sexiest thing. It's obviously not how people spend all day. I mean, well, we do in fact spend all day on email, but it's less social, obviously, and it's not, you know, it doesn't drive the political conversation in the way that Twitter does, or have the potential for vast reach of Facebook. Obviously, just about everyone has a Twitter, an email account, but it's less viral, it's less social. But email is still unparalleled in getting people to actually go do something, you know, so primarily donate, often primarily donate, but also volunteer or show up for something or whatever. It's not true that young people don't use it. I mean, people have been saying that young people don't use it for as long as I've been doing this work. At any given time, young people don't use it. Then they graduate college and have to start using it. So today's young people don't use it. That doesn't mean that they won't eventually use it. And that may change eventually, but it just hasn't changed yet. So, you know, I think it's impossible to ignore email. You know, if you happen to be self-funded or with a matching system in your locality, or, you know, for some reason without as much of an emphasis on raising money, I think you'd still need it for volunteers. But, you know, at that point, you know, I think they're just different. I mean, I hate to give a wishy-washy answer, but, you know, Twitter is obviously the best way to kind of be a part of the conversation, get yourself in front of reporters, get yourself in front of, you know, people who spend all day on Twitter and talk about politics. You know, Facebook has much more reach, and, you know, is probably a better way to reach actual voters, whether they're undecided voters or just, you know, supporters who aren't the kind of people who spend all day on Twitter. And then obviously Instagram is, you know, is where young people spend a ton of time. So by the way is TikTok. So by the way is Snapchat. I think people tend to underestimate Snapchat. It hasn't died by any means. It's not that hospitable to politics, but it's still something that you probably got to think about, maybe. So, you know, oh, and you need a website to kind of house a lot of the stuff that you'd be talking about on all those other platforms. So I hate to give a wishy-washy answer, but I guess I'd say email is still kind of king. If I had to rank them, I'd say probably Facebook next, but, you know, it would depend on kind of what you're trying to do and where.
Speaking of Facebook, we got a question from someone in the comments watching on Facebook. If you have a smaller budget for a local race, say like a city council, how would you think about doing paid social? Like, how would you allocate resources towards that? And a follow-up question here from Chelsea Mason: how do you balance the effectiveness of Facebook ads with the ethics of giving money to Facebook?
Great question. Okay, so on the first, you know, Twitter has made this a bit easy for us by disallowing us to advertise on their platform. Most of us weren't spending a ton of money on their platform in the first place, but now we can't. So, you know, I think Facebook and Instagram, which of course is owned by Facebook, is probably going to be the plurality of your buy. If it's a small budget, maybe even the totality of your buy. I mean, obviously it totally depends, and please don't write a media plan based on that, you know, gut level and uninformed comment. But, I think, again, Facebook just has near universal reach. That may be overstating it by now because people, young people are not on it so much, but they're on Instagram, and a lot of the targeting capabilities are, by design on their part, able to be utilized across both of those two platforms. I think I would be remiss not to say here that Facebook is a fantastic way to gain, to acquire email addresses and raise money. So you mentioned, the person with the question mentioned that you're dealing with a small budget. One way to possibly grow that budget would be to advertise for either email addresses or direct donations on Facebook. If you do email addresses, then obviously you are chasing it with a donation ask. And if you do direct donations, then they give right away. And by the way, you get their email address and can continue to chase them. That's something that's often worth testing. You can play around with it. There's a relatively low opportunity cost here. You could spend $500 on it, see if it seems to be working. If not, abandon that as a strategy. But certainly for reaching voters, I would think that Facebook would kind of be where you'd, where you'd prioritize your budget if it's, if it's small, Facebook and Instagram. And the ethics, everybody's got to kind of make that decision for themselves. I would have no, I would in fact be kind of inspired and think it was pretty badass if people wanted to stop advertising on Facebook. I wouldn't recommend it. I haven't to my current clients, or I have a couple friends running for offices and things like that. I think it's a little, it's a very different situation and ethical landscape, but it's a little like the question, should we, as Democrats, or I can't remember if Run for Something is formally Democratic. It is. Okay, great. Should we as Democrats, unilaterally abandon the idea of super PACs or abandon raising money from high dollar donors? I totally get why some people think, yes, this is not a hill I would die on. And in fact, I think they've got the more defensible moral position. My personal belief is unilateral disarmament in an era of asymmetric polarization on the part of the Republicans and asymmetric nastiness in campaign tactics on the part of the Republicans is a great way to feel good when you go to bed, and not a way to defeat these people and be in position to change these rules. And when it comes to Facebook, have some regulatory authority to change that company, or some cultural authority to change that company, or both. So I obviously don't love spending money there, but I think you're putting yourself at a vast disadvantage if you swear it off. By the way, to be consistent, you'd have to then also swear off Instagram. You could kind of pretend that you're doing something here and swear off Facebook, but not Instagram, but that doesn't really make any sense. So, it's not something I'm recommending. So I totally respect it. It just puts you at a disadvantage, and then the outcome maybe you lose to a Republican, which would be worse.
The other source I would look to for this is like Color of Change, which is leading the drive for companies to stop their ad spends on Facebook, is not encouraging that for themselves or for other nonprofits. So if you look to them as sort of the leaders of this boycott, they're okay with it, at least for now. You hinted at this, but it's a really interesting question from Nick Chanko. I apologize if I butchered that. How do you think about testing message effectiveness or reach on digital tools, especially for races that don't have polling? So using digital testing as a
that's a great and fun question that I really like. So, first of all, like the most important thing is to try it, so I think just by asking the question, that suggests that you're thinking about it, which is better than not, which is what many people do. So, I think it's, it is, how do I put this? It's not easy to prove efficacy, even when you do have polling. Like something I say about polling all the time is, if you've ever been on a call where someone reads out polling results, they tell you, right now we're at 47 points, but once we tell people that, we were a small business person before we were a politician, we're up by 11. And we don't win by 11 every time. So if polling was 100% predictive of how people actually respond in the real world, where they're not just hearing our message, but seeing our ads in the form of creative, which they may or may not watch all the way through, and they're seeing the other person's ads, and they're also seeing ads for, shoes and whatever else, we just don't really know. And by the way, I do think it's important to note that a message is not the same as a piece of creative, and a sentence as read to a person over the phone may seem to be effective, or someone may tell someone on the phone, tell a pollster on the phone that it's effective, and when turned into a 15-second ad or a 6-second ad or a 30-second ad, maybe not effective. So, and so I guess, by that same token, there's not perfect metrics for efficacy. They're not. It's not even perfect when you are doing a kind of experimentally controlled message test. So it's definitely not perfect when you're looking at what have people engaged with, et cetera. I think for me, I think. Length of completion rates and the time that someone sticks with a video in particular, which you can get out of YouTube and Facebook, is probably a pretty good indication. It's still going to be a bit misleading because like some people look at engagement and engagement, so comments, likes, shares. It's highly likely that in many cases, not necessarily every case, the people who already like, you may have developed a message that's super compelling to the people who already like you the most, that may say absolutely nothing to the people you're trying to reach. And I guess by that same token, video completion rates, Amanda, I'm seeing it's like great, it's wild out there. I don't know how many of you are in New York, but it's pretty wild out there. So anyway, by that same token, there could be a false positive or, just a funky correlation, between a completion rate and persuasiveness, but you have to start somewhere, and if you're not going to start off of gut, and by the way, I don't discount gut. I mean, if you're a smart person who cares about politics and you're talking to smart friends and advisors and staffers who care about politics, their gut, is worth something. And I try not to be overly kind of influenced by data, including because we know that sometimes we follow the data and lose. So that suggests that maybe there's more to it than what you can get out of a poll. But anyway, I think completion rates are good. I think engagement rates are can be misleading, but in the absence of something else, might be all you've got to go off of. If you've got the money, you can run a brand lift study on Facebook or YouTube. Those are both super great tools. YouTube in particular isn't that expensive, but I mean, you are talking about probably a couple tens of thousands, including making a video. So that is like kind of expensive in the context of most campaigns. So if you can do that, I would. But other than that, you're basically trying to look at correlated metrics like engagement and completion rates, and you have to kind of draw your own conclusions about what's actually what's actually compelling, moving people.
Another really interesting question from Facebook. As we start to think about like a holistic 360 view of the voter and how they're being reached, do you have any thoughts on integrating direct mail or lit drops with digital communications?
Yeah, I mean, look, you're talking about most likely a lot of money, and as a digital native who works in digital, I want to say, like, I think a lot of campaigns still to this day, even after all the articles about Brad Parscale and all the stuff and just the common sense that we all spend all day on the internet, campaigns tend to undervalue digital. So, it's not for me. Someone else should come on and give like a cheerlead for direct mail. It's just not my personal role in this universe. But I think direct mail and lit drops work. There was some evidence. This is years old at this point, but I think it was from 2012, but it actually might have been a midterm if I remember correctly, like maybe 14. There was some evidence that people don't get a lot of mail anymore, and especially young people don't get a lot of mail, and so. Now, not all young people even check their mail, but if they do and they get something that's glossy and beautiful, that actually may kind of stop them in their tracks more than a digital ad. And I think it's always interesting and useful to play around with the integration of the two, so again, now we're probably talking about like quite like bigger races that have like multiple teams on board and the ability to run experiments and things like that. But, you can typically measure a lift where, if someone gets a piece of mail that has a, kind of a noticeable brand and a certain message on it, and that same day on Facebook, they're confronted with, the creative should be digitally native, but the same brand and same message to some extent, that can be an accretive effect. So like doing both of them, the effect of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So I'm for all that stuff, but I can't in good conscience say you should take money away from digital unless you're just like swimming in cash.
I hard agree. Jarrett Schumacher, who's running for town council in Montvale, it has no staff. 99% of campaigning has traditionally been knocking on doors. He says he's done Zoom meet and greets and Facebook Lives, but his town has a less digitally forward population. So it's been difficult to find ways to get people to shift to the online relationship building. Do you have any advice?
So I'm trying to look at the question so I can actually make sure I got it. Are you doing, you're doing calls and you're doing texting?
Jarrett, if you want to jump into the chat and confirm that, you absolutely should. He says he's been doing Zoom meet and greets and Facebook Lives and doesn't have any staff, so it's just him.
Got it. So, I mean, a couple things. I don't pretend to know what exactly you should do, and you know your community better than I do, obviously. You know, I think it's typically not that now. Older folks, you know, seniors may be not quite as digitally savvy as their grandkids, but they're all on the internet. You know, they're overwhelmingly on Facebook. In fact, they're the ones who are using Facebook more as their grandkids are using it less. They almost certainly have an email address. They almost certainly have a mobile phone that can be called or texted. So, you know, I think to me, I guess my gut or something I begin to wonder as I hear that question is, you know, maybe Facebook Live is the wrong, you know, thing to do on Facebook. Maybe they're not so used to live stream video, or maybe I mean, I actually am thinking of a specific thing where a older person in my life got to the page where there was something streaming, but didn't know that you had to hit play to actually generate the stream. So, you know, I think that maybe just simple posts are the way to go. You know, I'm not exactly sure, but again, they're highly likely. I mean, you may be in a community with a rural broadband issue. I don't know. So, I mean, again, I'm trying not to be too know-it-all, but it's pretty likely that they're overwhelmingly on Facebook. It's pretty likely that they've got mobile phones. Again, they may not use it in quite the, you know, with quite as much gusto as their grandkids, but they probably use them. And maybe you just need to find a way to kind of simplify the formats, or, you know, go with shorter posts, go with simpler graphics, make sure your graphics have bigger font. I mean, like, you know, sort of basic accessibility stuff would be one thing I'd wonder about. And then, like I said, you know, they're probably mostly textable. They're probably all callable, and, you know, that's all stuff you can do without knocking on doors. I'm sure you're at a disadvantage here again, but you know, they've probably got the internet, and they've probably got phones, and probably got Facebook.
I know Jarrett jumped into the chat to note that they don't have a ton of email data or phone data, and he is doing.
So you are really, really at a disadvantage, yeah. So, yeah. You know, I mean, gosh, I don't know. I mean, you know, I would think about how to make a Facebook strategy that is as simple and not dependent on, you know, tech savvy users as humanly possible. He says, sorry, I'm not making this easy. Well, no, it sounds like it's your local party and the reality of a global pandemic that is not making it easy. You know, obviously you've got to get some more data. So I don't know if you can work with partners on that. There are partners who can help on that. And again, you know, think about how to make the Facebook experience as simple as possible. Maybe use that to get more data. You know, another thing that just jumps into my mind as I wrap this not that helpful answer, sorry, Jarrett, is, you know, I'm sure you've done this, but to the extent that there are some people in this community who can reach, who are kind of in this senior demo that you're having trouble reaching, I'd like focus group them. I mean, just informally be like how do you reach your friends? How am I supposed to reach people? You know, maybe no one's answering the door, but I'm guessing that local, you know, pizza delivery spots are putting flyers at their door. So, you know, you can't knock on it and have the conversation, but you can reach them that way. I don't know, but I would see what, you know, people who are actually, you know, representative of the community have to say, in addition to maybe trying out some of what I just said, if possible.
The only two other things I would add is, to the folks that you can reach, can you turn them into your ambassadors, your advocates, whatever way is native for them? So, like, ask them how they communicate with their friends, and then give them the materials to do so. The other thing I would add, and like, we've tried this in various email fundraising programs and it never quite works, but I could see it working more successfully for a city council or town council race, is email forwarding. So giving people something and specifically saying, forward it to your friends, forward it to your neighbors. Even if you only have a list of like a couple hundred, they might be able to reach the broader network through their own list.
I'm super glad you said that. And just one quick thing is, you know, something that it sounds obvious when you say it, but I had to learn is, like, people do things when you ask them to do them that they don't do if you don't ask them to do them. And so, you know, I think we're all a lot less we all have a lot less sort of freedom of choice than we think. And the fact of the matter is, if you, begin an email saying, please forward this to 5 friends, people are going to like see that and do it. Not everybody, obviously, but a lot more than if you don't do that, but just hope the content is so great that people take it upon themselves to, to forward it.
Really interesting question from Susan Merriam, whose candidate is a municipal employee, so can't ask for money on social. Are there ways to do fundraising that isn't necessarily on social? And more broadly, any general tips for asking for money online?
Well, so Amanda, I feel like you should maybe take the first crack at this. I mean, so I'm guessing from the way the question is phrased that your boss's account is an official account and there's not a political account or a personal account. So it might be worth thinking about having a political account or a personal account. I mean, again, obviously that's a resource and time question. And so I don't want to say you definitely should, but that is, that is limiting. And so plenty of people have both an official account and a personal account. And so I would think that you'd be able to.
You explain that a little bit, because I feel like most candidates may not realize like that's why members of Congress will have 2 separate accounts.
So government accounts, I think at every level, maybe some state or city has some wacky rules, but anyway, in most situations, government officials, be they executives or legislators or judges in our wonderful country that elects judges, can't participate in political activity, overtly political partisan activity on their official government Twitter, Facebook, Instagram accounts. In the era of Donald Trump, people are bending this rule. I mean, Donald Trump just did a campaign event from the Rose Garden. It's appalling, but you certainly can't ask for campaign donations from your government account, and shouldn't really say, oh, the Republicans are horrible from your government account, which is why many members of Congress, many local elected officials, governors. I mean, this is not just for federal officials. I'm thinking of city councilors here in New York have a city councilor Littman account, as well as a, I am Amanda Littman account. And from the I am Amanda Littman account, you can talk about how the Republicans are horrible. You can ask for money. You can ask for campaign volunteers. You can announce events. It winds up being a pretty helpful thing, because, you just need reach on this stuff. And so, if you've got everybody following the account that can't talk about the things you're trying to promote, that's not good. Again, it takes money. It doesn't necessarily take money. It takes time. Someone's got to deal with it. It's something to consider, possibly. If not, look, I mean, if you're not doing that, there's no, your email list, if there is one, is not probably going to be a government list. I mean, maybe if it's scraped off of a government website, but if you got it off your campaign website, that's yours and you can raise money off of it. Your supporters obviously can raise money. And so, I think the question was about raising money on social media, but they can send out a tweet, they can host a house party, a socially distanced house party, I guess. They can, they can send an email to 100 friends. There's nothing stopping them from doing that, and there's nothing stopping you from asking that. So it seems like kind of all the different things that you can do, there's a way to do, with the one exception of if it's a government account, you can't ask for it. So, my goodness. That lightning bolt sounded like it was next door. Anyway, I hope that's helpful. Amanda, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I think it's really, make sure you read the laws. We're not lawyers. So you should definitely check with like your party counsel or your lawyer about how you can go about doing this. There are ways to find a way to yes in a lot of circumstances. Do not put yourself at like legal risk, but there are ways you can find a way to yes. Jasmine wants to know a little bit more about like an Instagram strategy. If you were going to give like an Instagram 101 campaign strategy for a candidate who's probably running their own account themselves, what would your advice be?
If you're running the campaign account yourself, I guess the first thing I would say, I don't know if you were on at the very beginning, but I said, like, when we were both actually, Amanda and I, working for President Obama, we used to have this little catchphrase, how are we giving our people the best experience they can have today? And I think many campaigns and candidates think that what you should do with an Instagram account is like show the day-to-day of the campaign, show yourself knocking on door. Well, you may not be doing that because of COVID. Show yourself on the phone, show volunteers smiling. And the reality is that there's a place for that, and maybe someone's going to have a fantastic account that just does that. But but I think by and large, that is what's on your mind because you're working on the campaign, and that's not actually what's on the mind of the person who doesn't care about this as much as you do, and doesn't find a picture of 10 smiling faces, as they're volunteering for you, all that compelling relative to all the other stuff that you can get on Instagram, from like hot people to food to pictures of countries that you wish you could travel to but you can't because of COVID. So I think it comes back to like how are you being interesting, so I don't think that means high production values. I don't think that means you need to hire a expensive photographer or buy an expensive camera. I do think video is always worth. I don't even think we've really talked about video yet on this call, but I mean, video makes the internet go round. So I mean, you can do a video on your iPhone or your Android phone. So it does not have to be an expensive video, but most of the platforms just give preferential algorithmic treatment to video. So there's an innate reason to do video. But I think maybe you can figure out ways to be funny. Maybe you can tell people stories that are super moving. Maybe you can show them data or examples of things you want to fix in the community that really speak to them. I don't know what it is, but I mean, I would put yourself in the frame of mind of the person you're talking to, rather than trying to kind of, rather than being stuck in the mind of the campaign, which is I think what a lot of campaigns do. And then just as a tactical thing, Instagram is all about the story. Didn't used to be, well, there didn't used to be stories, obviously, but stories are everything. Many people don't even scroll through and look at the feed anymore. They're just looking at stories. So, and I think stories are fun. There's just a lot you can do with them, and you don't need to worry about the permanence of them. You obviously shouldn't create a problem for yourself by saying something you wish you hadn't, but it's not up there forever. You can talk about something that no one's going to care about tomorrow. You can play around. You can have fun with the native features like filters and GIFs and stuff like that. But one way or another, I guess I would just think, I don't know where you are and what you're running for, but what is it that's interesting about this campaign to somebody else?
We have time for a couple more questions. So while we hit one more, I want to encourage folks, if they have anything else they want to make sure we get to drop it into the Q&A. And we can, of course, harass Teddy over any other platform to ask for more questions for what's on his mind. Liz Morrison, who you may recall from 2012.
Hey, I saw your book, but it's a somewhat common name, so I wasn't 100% sure it's you, but hi, Liz.
Hi, Liz. So I will read this out loud. One of the brightest spots in the last few months was when the K-pop stans and teens RSVP'd for all the tickets to the Tulsa rally. Media covered it, or referred to it as an act of a stunt or a prank or a joke. But Liz says it was really a creative bit of activism. How do we still keep encouraging young people to do this kind of activism on the channels that are native to them? And how do we change the media narrative to call it what it is, to really define it as something that's like a political act?
I'd be interested in your take on that, Liz, and also Amanda. I think that, I think to a large degree, and by the way, I want to plus up what Laura DeVoe said in the chat. I agree and wish I had said that too. So that's a great comment. I think that there's a degree to which campaigns and professional organizers and professional activists of any kind are always going to be following the lead of people who don't do this for a living. And most often, not always, but most often, those people are going to be younger than the people who do it for a living, And I think there's a reason for that, because when people who aren't getting paid to do this, even if you have a job that you're passionate about, when people take it upon themselves to do something that they're not getting paid to do, they really mean it, and they're really doing it for a reason. So, as I thought about the K-pop thing, does everyone remember? I think this was a big deal that everyone remembers, right? Yeah, okay. As I thought about the K-pop thing, I thought, the truth of the matter is, if the Biden campaign had that idea and tried to make it happen, it would have failed. In fact, I think people would have thought it was like a somewhat cringy, bizarre thing that we might have made fun of. It could only have been done by people who had no affiliation with the Biden campaign whatsoever. So I think that we're kind of like, those of us who do this for a living, whether it's political campaigns or just advocacy and activism, are kind of perpetually in the condition of trying to learn from people who don't do this for a living rather than the other way around, and figure out two things. One, how to make sure that we're producing an environment, and when it comes to Democrats, a party that is welcoming for these people. Like, I don't think it's a secret, like lots of people who probably participated in that K-pop action, stunt, whatever we want to call it, probably if they were old enough, didn't vote in 16, probably didn't feel that the Democratic Party was something that speaks for them, may still not. So how are we creating a party and a space that is welcoming to them? That one has not gotten to me yet, Amanda, but that looked scary. And then also, how are we sort of learning from them tactically and trying to, create things that are appropriate to a campaign? I don't mean appropriate like, is the local newspaper going to say you're way out of bounds? I mean appropriate like, is the activist going to think this is something that the campaign has any business doing, or is it just going to feel ridiculous? So, to me, I think, as I thought about the K-pop thing, I thought those two things, how do we make sure that we're a party that wins over those people and does it authentically and organically and convincingly? And I don't think any of them obviously like Donald Trump, but that doesn't mean they like us. And then, what do we learn from this? And I think the answer is not that we should try, K-pop stunts, maybe sometimes, but I think more often than not, that's not going to work, because the joy of that was that it wasn't done by a professional campaign. But I think there were things that we could learn from both the ethos of it and just the tactics and the specific idea of it. And that's what I think about that. Amanda?
I want to know, one of the like really common conversations around digital tactics is like arming your supporters to fight back with the facts, to fact check, to like have the materials they need to advocate on your behalf. If you're a city council or a state-led campaign with not a lot of time or resources, do you think that should be something you prioritize necessarily? How would you sort of like stack rank that in the list of things that a campaign needs to do to engage supporters?
Like the facts thing?
Yeah, or just like, how do you give people what they need? Because as you said, like some of the best, the content, the materials, the messaging online comes from people outside the campaign because they have the passion. Is there a way for a campaign to really connect with that without monopolizing it or like colonizing it?
Well, I actually think this goes to that comment from, sorry, I'm so bad with names, the person who I just said a smart thing. Like I think one of the things about the way most of these platforms are built, I mean, I think like Twitter obviously is like all about the retweet, and Instagram didn't used to, like prior to stories, there wasn't you could download an app or, like a third-party tool for regrams, but that wasn't a kind of a core or native thing in the platform. And now stories are kind of all about sharing content, and they all, there's like a little button at the bottom where you can share it to your own story. So I tend to think lifting up someone else is often the better and more kind of authentic way to, I just said I don't care about authenticity, but the more kind of true and respectful way to kind of take advantage of your support. And it's likely, and you can do that very easily in an Instagram story and obviously in a tweet. And it's likely that a person who's not on your payroll reading polls, if you have them, or spending all day thinking about how to write pretty stuff in your, in support of your campaign, it's likely that they may actually do a better job, frankly. There's a limit, I think, to what campaigns themselves can do. And so just lifting them up, I think, is a pretty powerful thing to do. And by the way, I think signals to other people that you're a campaign that cares about what people have to say and isn't too command and control. But I guess I think, everyone's saying this, so I hope it doesn't sound like a trope or like a cliche, but like the internet is everything, like you may read a story from the New York Times, which obviously has a newspaper, but you're very likely reading it on the internet. You may be dealing with a friend and you know each other face to face, but right now you're very likely dealing with them on the internet. And so, the internet, has some role to play in like everything you're going to do on a campaign. And you've got to make some prioritization and resource decisions, because you can't tweet 500 times a day and you can't do absolutely everything. There may be a campaign where you've got to fight back against misinformation and arm people to help you do that. There may be a campaign where you've got to get people, together in person and use Instagram to get people to know where they're supposed to go and when. There may be a campaign where, telling stories about all the potholes in the community that you want to, what's the word I'm looking for? Fix, I'll just go with fix, put more concrete on, repave, that was what I was going for, that may be what you have to do, and there may be a campaign where you have to do kind of all three of those things, but you got to decide what you're doing when, there's not an answer here. But the truth of the matter is almost every single person in America and the world spends a whole lot of time, a disgusting amount of time, looking at their laptop screen and their phone screen, and a large share of that is spent on either email or a social media platform or a news website, and you've got ways to affect the experience, not control, but affect the experience they have with your campaign on all of those.
I think that's a really good place to end on. I have one request for a bunch of the folks who've been in the chat. If you know politicians, especially local candidates who are on TikTok, can you please email them to me? Like email me their names or their TikTok accounts or tweet them at me or whatever. I am so fascinated by this, especially, I want to follow all of them. I'm fascinated by it. So please do, Amanda@runforsomething.net, send me any of the, especially some of the younger candidates who are on TikTok. I would like to see everything. With that, if you have any other questions for Teddy, where can people find you?
My DMs are open on Twitter. It's just my name, or my email address is my name @gmail. I may be a little slower on email, but I do my best. So either of those, bring it on. I do respond to everybody, even if it takes me a little bit of time.
Thank you, Teddy, for joining us. Thank you to everyone who jumped on and who watched on Facebook. We are doing these every week. Next week is Ross is moderating a conversation with Sarah Oduello and Ben Wessel about youth vote engagement. It's going to be super interesting. We are continuing this into August with conversations about email fundraising, about paid ads. I forget what else is on the agenda, but it's a really good one. It should be fun. Again, if you love these, if you think they're interesting, if you're able to contribute, runforsomething.net/build is where to go. These chats are all free, but whatever you can contribute means a lot to us. With that, stay safe, stay dry. This thunderstorm is fucking terrifying.
Crazy. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Amanda.
Thanks, Teddy.